One time.
I love talking about marijuana testing. I think in part I was introduced to it by Joe in February of 2014, and I just developed a respect for the art of testing cannabis. So
It really is an art.
It is. It's an art and a science, right? And this is a question for both of you, but we all know, Joe just said that if you test the same product in different labs, the results won't always be the same. In fact, they probably won't be exactly the same ever. So is that kind of variance scientifically sound? Or do these cannabis-specific labs have a lot more work to do? I mean, can consumers trust cannabis labs in 2015? I think we're used to the idea of medicine saying, oh, this is X amount of milligrams of ibuprofen. We think that that should be exact, but is it always? Malcolm, why don't you get us started, man?
I think
oh, he's getting deep.
I think the state has a lot of. I think all the labs are quality. I don't think it's fair to say just because a lab gave you back a result that you didn't agree with or variated from another lab that you were at, that it's a bad lab. That's not a fair thing to say. I think that everyone is highly qualified. I think the state does a really great job of qualifying the labs and making sure that everyone has the skill sets and the toolboxes to be able to interpret and understand the numbers they're doing. It's just everybody's going about it in a different manner, and they're not arriving at the same numbers because the instrumentation they're using is different, the methods that they use the instrumentation is different, the operators are different, the solvents they're using to extract whatever it is they're testing, whether it be flower material or concentrate or an edible, is different. I think we need to come together, and I think the reference library is a great starting point. If that can actually be established and can be stewarded in a way, I think that's the key to unlocking. And then getting a discussion amongst all the labs there. If we're testing for potency, this is how we're going to test for potency. If we're going to test for homogeneity, this is how we're going to do. I mean, really, it's coming together as a scientific community and treating this like science, so we can all replicate each other's numbers and we can back each other up, and we don't have this squabbling taking place and this just petty name calling of like who's a good lab or who's a bad lab. I think that there's a lot of great lab technicians out there, and obviously people are investing a lot of time and money into the instrumentation and the equipment that they're using in their labs. It's just, is it being used correctly to pull out what it is we're looking to see and how that's being done?
And Joe, what's your take on this? I know when we first met and started talking about this, I was amazed that there could be a 10 to 15%, if not more, variance from lab to lab. So is that the way it's going to always be? I mean, we're going to be having this conversation in 2025, and there's still this 10% variance from lab to lab?
I don't know if it'll be that case in 2025, but it will certainly be that case in the next 5 years. FDA, for example, and you mentioned, I think it was, what, ibuprofen. If you buy your ibuprofen at the store and it says whatever, I'm trying to think.
200 milligrams.
Yeah, that's the average dose, 200 milligrams. There is a variance associated with that, and I believe that variance is
20%.
Yep.
Yeah.
I was going to say 15.
Okay.
No, 20.
20.
Oh,
yeah, 20%.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, so that's a variance allowed for a drug that's made on a very exacting scale.
In a very regulated market.
And,
incredibly regulated,
Right. And so when we're dealing with like, cannabis analysis, let's say I come from the environmental background, that's my background, environmental industry, environmental chemistry. And we're always, that background gives me a certain perspective for this industry, because if you talk about a flower, that is really an environmental analysis. It's not a drug analysis, because the flower is a very complex matrix, and what you're trying to do is there's all these other compounds in there that interfere with what you're trying to test for, which in this case would be THCA. So you're trying to basically separate out the THCA from everything else in that matrix. You may be looking at other cannabinoids as well. We test for 10 different cannabinoids. So you have all these compounds are trying to pull out of complex matrices. Even food matrices are complex. They're more complex than, let's say, the ibuprofen that you're buying at the store. So when you have that type of matrix and you're trying to pull the compound out, it makes it that much more difficult and makes that much more variability. We mentioned the plus or minus 20% for the FDA. In environmental analyses, if they're going to test your groundwater for contaminants, You know, they're going to look for PCE in your groundwater. This is very common. They test it in every, you know, probably every water supply in the country.
And what's PCE? Just curious.
Perchloroethylene.
Okay.
It is basically one of the common contaminants that comes from dry cleaning. This has been in the environment for many, many years. And it was one thing we looked at often. But anyway, the point being that in your groundwater, you know, you want to know that it's below a certain level of perchloroethylene. Well, when they come up with a number or a actual result, that result has a plus or minus 25% variance that is allowed for. So what I'm saying is that when you get into more complex matrices and like environmental matrices or soil's incredibly difficult, sludge, things like this, and they add variance to your analysis. And so when you got back to your original question in 2025, I don't know where we'll be, but certainly in the next 5 years, we'll still be looking at this 10 to 15% variance. I'm sure we won't be any closer than that.
Wow.
You know,
I mean, you guys are professionals in this field. Do you think that might come as a surprise to our average viewer or listener out there? I mean, our viewers are incredibly intelligent, but do you think they know that there is already this variance attached to the pharmaceutical drugs that we're purchasing from grocery stores and pharmacies?
I would guess that most people do not, based on what I've seen in this industry anyway, and the expectation that it seems like people have in this industry for what that number is supposed to be kind of leads me to believe that, well, yeah, okay, I guess you don't really understand that the ibuprofen you bought at the grocery store has that type of variance in it.
I think for me, especially because as a journalist, we write about facts, we write about what people say, and it's such a treasure to be able to speak with scientists and to work with scientists who can do testing for you on pesticides, on potency, contamination, and I don't know, I think we want to treat this scientific analysis as fact, but I guess it's as close a fact as we can get to, at least for now.